Welcome to today's episode of the On the Up podcast, brought to you by Moneypenny. In this special episode 14, we're looking back over the last few podcasts to do a review of our book club so far. And if you didn't remember already, all of our recent guests have come with recommendations of books that they think everyone would be interested to go and have a look at. So we're going to cut back through a few episodes now and take a look at some of those. So we'll cut back to episode 9 now, where I was joined by Paul and Simon from Spiker, who were talking about all things tech in the workplace, and both of them brought some great recommendations. So one of the things that we ask all of our guests on the podcast as well is to recommend some business books that they found really interesting for our listeners to go away and have a read of. So it'd be great to hear if you guys have any recommendations you'd like to share there as well.
Yeah, I'd probably go for Unworking by Jeremy Myerson and Philip Ross. So reinventing the modern workplace. So that kind of takes it from post-COVID era and deconstructing old workplaces and old ideas and values and building completely new workplaces which are flexible, more human-centric and designed for purpose. And I think if you're a workplace stakeholder and provisioning workplaces, then it's a great one to have a look at because it encompasses hybrid working. One of my favorite sections, of course, technology as an enabler, but it also looks at cultural and leadership and how that's changed in the new modern way of doing that, and also, design on experience. So it's a good one.
Great. And I'd go for Human-Centric Workplace by Simone Fenton-Jarvis. I imagine a few people might mention that one because it's obviously a book that really focuses on, like we've talked today a lot about, is understanding what the people need. And for us, to get technology deployed, you've got to understand what problems you want to solve, and really delving into, the differences in the workplace these days. I've seen Simone on a couple of talks as well, and, covering some things that if you didn't really properly understand it, having 5 different generations in the workplace, all sorts of different challenges around different people, and how an organization goes about dealing with that. And the organizations who offer a great experience, so for the people, again, it works back to the customers. So that's something I think is definitely a workplace must read.
So Paul recommended Simone Fenton-Jarvis's book, Human-Centric Workplace. Now at Moneypenny, a lot of the team here know Simone really well, so I'm sure that's a great read. I've not read it personally yet, but I've got my copy in the post. But it's a really interesting book about how businesses can make sure that their workplaces and environments focus on people first. And Simon recommended a book by Jeremy Myerson and Philip Ross called Unworking, Reimagining the Modern Workplace. Really interesting book looking at all the changes that have happened over the last few years and how businesses can adapt to make their workplaces better. Next, we'll go back to episode 10, where I was joined by Donna and Emma from MPro, and we were talking about how businesses can create an engaging workplace. Donna, do you want to go first with your recommendations?
Yes, so I've got 2. I hope you don't mind. But again, a bit like Emma, so during my career, I've had a couple of great mentors that I've worked with or have been my boss. So I've been blessed with that. And so my first one is Who Moved My Cheese? Which is my first one. And this is it's written by Dr. Spencer Johnson. I'm sure it's still out in publication, but I did get it years ago. And this is a book about approaching change and the consequence of closing your mind to it in personal situations and work as well. So really highly recommend that. I'm doing a little bit of coaching and mentoring with some of the consultancy teams, so I'm definitely going to sort of pass these on because I think that's a great one. And another one is called Fish, and this is by John Christensen. It's been remastered, the book, from the original one I read. But it's a parable, and it's about boosting morale and improving results. But it's really written in a really fun way, and it's about sort of choosing the attitude you have in the workplace and how that can impact on success. So, they're both really fun reads as well. So yeah, and I know lots of people have read them and feel the same. So I highly recommend those 2. They're mine. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to give full disclosure. I haven't read this book yet, but I think recommended it by very many people who I respect hugely. And it is called Building the Story Brand by Donald Miller. And this is all about building a brand and how your value proposition stacks up and how you clarify your message with customers. And it's been recommended by at least 5 people to me, so it must be good. And yeah, I'll drop you a message when I do eventually read it, Dan, and let you know what I think.
We had lots of great recommendations from Donna and Emma there. Donna actually gave us 2 books. The first one by Dr. Spencer Johnson called Who's Moved My Cheese, which is all about embracing change within businesses. And the second one by John Christensen called Fish, which is inspired by Seattle's fish market and talks about how businesses can use motivating tactics and create a great culture to drive growth. And finally, Emma recommended a book by Donald Miller, which is called Building the Story Brand, which is all about how businesses can use storytelling to bring clear and concise messaging. In our next episode, I was joined by JE Consulting's Callum Macrae, and we were talking all about how Gen Z is the future of the workplace, and Callum brought a really interesting recommendation along with him. The final thing we wanted to kind of cover off today is, we run the On the Up book club as well. So we asked you to recommend a book for our guests. So love to hear what book you'd like to recommend.
Yes, I have it here with me. So I Love Anything by Dan Sullivan. And I got gifted this book actually after one of my speaking gigs. So it's 10 times is easier than 2 times. And it's a great book because, again, for me, it completely shifted my mindset of things, again, that you think are unattainable or not achievable. It's more psychological and changes your ways of thinking of how to do things. He's got some great books out there. I think the other one is Who Not How or How Not Who. Yeah, I love books like this because I think I'm a huge fan of every day you can learn something different. And if I can, going back to the marginal gains, if I can start to have a lot of those 1% that make a huge tangible impact, I'd definitely recommend this book.
So Callum brought a great recommendation along with him and actually brought the book for us too. It's a book called 10 Times is Easier Than 2 Times by an author called Dan Sullivan. And it's a really interesting book all around how the concept of aiming for doing something 10 times where you are right now is more likely to drive great results than aiming 2 times ahead of where you are now. So something worth having a look at if you're in a really fast growing business and you've got big objectives. So for the next episode, I was joined by Peter Knight and we were talking all about the role of great leaders in growing businesses. And as usual, Peter came with some fantastic insights and recommendations. I'd love to get your recommendations on some of the books you recommend people go away and read.
This is a really challenging question for me, Dan, because I'm a serial reader. It sounds rather grand, doesn't it, to call it a library, but I've got over 3,000 books there. There's books everywhere, right, in my life.
I think I've seen your library on a call before, actually.
Yeah,
it was quite impressive.
Well, it's, there's a lot in there. And so where do you start? Okay, so I often say to people, the absolute starting point, if someone's in a new to leadership role or indeed new to business role, is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But a second book that is not as well known that Stephen wrote is called Principle-Centered Leadership. And it's really the 7 habits applied to an organization. So it's taking up another level from personal to organizational level. And you kindly, before, when I asked you if I could have 2 books as opposed to one, indulge me with that. So again, I've referenced Jim Collins, and of course, Jim Collins is best known for Good to Great. But the book that actually I think was the most significant for me that he wrote was called Beyond Entrepreneurship. Now, he's just updated it and written a follow-up called BE 2.0, Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, which is a good read, but I would be tempted to start with the original, and in particular, the first third of it. I think anybody in a startup who's looking to get into a scale-up, which is one of the most difficult challenges for leaders, startup it's not easy. Scale-up, I think, is even harder. And beyond entrepreneurship, this idea of moving from an entrepreneurial type environment into a medium-sized environment, that I think is a really good read.
Amazing. So Peter recommended 2 books there. The first one was a book by the very famous Stephen Covey, known for the 7 Principles of Highly Effective Leadership. But Peter recommended a follow-on book called Principle-Centered Leadership. Really interesting concepts from a great author there, so worth checking out if you enjoyed that first book. Peter's second recommendation was a book by an author called Jim Collins, and it's called Beyond Entrepreneurship. He recommended that book for any small businesses that are growing and want to get their business to a bigger level. So definitely worth a read if you're already working and just want to aim for those high goals. In our latest episode, I was joined by Charlotte Wiseman from Step Inside Group, and we were talking about developing leaders of today and the future. And Charlotte brought a fantastic recommendation along with her. We wrap up our podcast episodes now by asking all of our guests to recommend a book for our On the Up book club. So we'd love to get your take on what is a good book for people to read.
I've chosen a book for this that is, it's not a very new, it's not, it's not the latest book out, but I still love it. And it's the book that opened my mind to the power of what creating a good culture really could do in terms of how it could help performance. And it was the book that changed my perception of what I could just be doing as a manager, as a leader. And the book was The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. And it's one of his very early books. I still think it's fantastic. I was a cynic when I came to this book, and even the title I didn't love, coupled with the fact that my brother had recommended it, which meant, I was like, oh, my older brother's telling me what to do again. And I read it and I thought, that's pretty good. And there's some pretty compelling evidence. Now, the evidence now, because the book is not the most up to date, it's all evolved. There are newer editions of it. But I think it's a really nice, easy read, quick dip in to what the power of positive psychology in the workplace could be. And there's so much of me that wants to offer a second book, but I don't think you're going to allow me that, are you?
Well, you are very welcome if you would like to recommend a second book.
So the second one is a newer one, and that was by Cal Newport, and that's called Slow Productivity. And that's it's an interesting book that was published last year, but it talks about the pace of work at the moment and how it's possibly not promoting optimal performance, and it's not helping us to think at our best, and it's actually not realistic. So it's also it's inhibiting performance, and it's impairing well-being and resilience. So quite an interesting book, what effective working is, and challenging questions out there, which I think would be useful for a lot of people to think about.
So Charlotte's recommendation was a book by an author called Sean Aker, and it's called The Happiness Advantage. Really interesting book all around the idea that happiness drives success and not the other way around. So definitely worth a read. Charlotte also gave us another recommendation by an author called Cal Newport and a book called Slow Productivity. This one's all about slowing things down and focusing on the quality of doing things rather than the speed of doing things. So again, a really interesting read if you're in a fast growing business. So we thought as an extra add-on for this episode, I'll drop in a few of my own recommendations too of books that I've read recently and had recommended to me. The first one that I want to talk about, I actually mentioned in one of the episodes we recorded recently, and it's a book by Patrick Lencioni, and it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And this was actually recommended to me by our head of talent here at Moneypenny, Debbie. And it's a really interesting book for people that are growing and building diverse teams. Some really interesting points in there around ensuring that you get trust and everyone feels comfortable in what they're doing. So worth a read from my opinion. The second one that I want to recommend, I've actually got with me today, which is Tony Blair's book on leadership. Now, whether you agree with Tony's politics or not, and the politics of the Labour Party is another question, but for me, it's a really interesting book that looks at leadership from a different angle of someone that essentially ran a country and not a team of people in a business for a really long time. And there's lots of different nuances and small things that you have to get around, like foreign policy, egos, building up teams where people are trying to build their own big careers and essentially take his job at different times as well. So it's a really kind of interesting and nuanced look at leadership behind the scenes. So definitely worth a read for any budding business leaders. So that's it for today's episode of the On the Up podcast, where we've gone through those recent book club recommendations. We'll drop a link to all the books in the bio for this recording so everyone can go and have their own read. And if you've got any recommendations for yourselves as well, please reach out and share them with us and our listeners. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the On the Up podcast brought to you from Moneypenny. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon.